How the rich are destroying the world. What if climate breakdown were closely linked to the social crisis around the world? Those with political and financial power are promoting a model of excessive consumption, imitated by the middle classes, despite its devastating effect on the planet. If those at the top supported degrowth, the rest would follow. Welcome back to the Top Trendy Info channel. If it's your first time here, please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for fast-hand info as they happen. The 3 or 4 generations alive at the turn of the third millennium are the first in the history of humanity, since bipeds first started roaming the planet, to come up against the limits of the biosphere. This meeting is taking place in the context of a major ecological crisis. The first feature of this crisis is renewed concern on the part of climate scientists. For several years now, these have been working with the hypothesis that climate change may be irreversible. Until recently, it was thought that gradual warming would occur, but that when humanity realized the gravity of the situation, it would be possible for us to row back and redress the climatic balance. Climate scientists say that it is possible we are reaching the threshold where the system slips into irreversible disorder. This concern is fueled by several observations. In Greenland, glaciers are melting much faster than our models predicted. The oceans may be pumping less carbon dioxide. Warming already underway is accelerating the melting of permafrost, a large layer of frozen earth in Siberia and Canada, and threatening to release the enormous quantities of carbon dioxide and methane it contains. Their second observation is that the phenomenon of climate change is the aspect of the ecological crisis best known to the general public, but it is only one part of it. Equally important is an erosion of biodiversity on such a scale that experts are calling the species loss. Our era is experiencing the 6th extinction event. The 5th extinction event, 65 million years ago, saw the disappearance of the dinosaurs. A third observation, which is perhaps less palpable or less well understood than the issue of climate change, is the widespread chemical contamination of our environment, which is disturbing for 2 reasons. On the one hand, food chains are adulterated by chemical pollutants, albeit in small doses. On the other, it is becoming clear that the oceans, the planet's largest ecosystems, which seemed almost infinite in their capacity to regenerate, have been increasingly weakened, either by the pollution or the degradation of one of their distinctive ecosystems. All this explains the political urgency of our time, but the warnings are not new. Rachel Carson sounded the alarm in 1962 with her book Silent Spring, and ecological issues became a flashpoint of public debate in the 1970s. Since then, international conferences, scientific articles and climate campaigns have amassed a body of knowledge that confirms the general trend. Why, then, are societies not moving towards policies that would prevent the deepening of the ecological crisis? To answer this crucial question, we must analyze how power relations are structured to block necessary policies. Over the past 20 years, capitalism has been characterized by the return of poverty in rich countries. The decline in the poverty rate had been continuous since the end of the 1940s, but in Western countries this stopped and, in some cases, reversed. The number of people living in precarity, that is to say slightly above the poverty line, is increasing steadily. Globally, the number of people living in absolute poverty, on less than $2 a day, remains at around 2 billion, while the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, estimates that 820 million people are malnourished. Another feature of the social crisis is the increase in inequalities over the past 20 years, which has been confirmed by multiple studies. One of the most telling, led Carola Friedman and Raven E. Sachs, economists at Harvard and the Federal Reserve, compared the ratio of the salaries of the top 3 executives of the U.S.'s 500 largest companies to the average salary of their employees. This indicator of the development of inequalities remained stable from the 1940s to the 1970s. Bosses earned approximately 35 times the average salary of their employees. In the 1980s, there was a disconnect, and the ratio grew fairly steadily until bosses' pay reached around 130 times that of the average employee in the 2000s. These studies show a major break in the workings of capitalism over 60 years. During what was called the Trente Glorieuses, 1945 to 75, collective enrichment made possible by a steady rise in productivity was quite fairly distributed between capital and labor, keeping levels of inequality stable. From the 1980s, a set of circumstances we need not analyze here led to an increasingly pronounced disconnect between the owners of capital and the bulk of ordinary citizens. A class of oligarchs is accumulating income and inheritance to an extent that has not been seen in a century. It is essential that we examine the concrete ways in which the super-rich use their money. Money is no longer hidden as it was in the time of the austere Protestant bourgeoisie Max Weber described. On the contrary, it fuels the outrageous consumption of yachts, private jets, huge residences, jewels, watches, exotic trips, a gaudy jumble of lavish squandering. With Nicolas Sarkozy, the French began to discover a distressing example of this flashy behavior. Why is this a driver of ecological crisis? To answer, we must turn to the great economist Thorstein Veblen, whose thinking Raymond Aron rated alongside that of the military theorist Karl von Clausewitz and the political scientist Alexis de Tocqueville. Although largely forgotten, Veblen's thought nevertheless has striking relevance today. In summary, Veblen said that the tendency to compete is inherent in human nature. We have a propensity to compare ourselves to others, and each try to show off some small superiority through our external traits, a symbolic difference to the people around us. Veblen did not claim that human nature could be reduced to this trait, and he did not judge it from a moral point of view, he just observed it. Drawing on the testimonies of the ethnographers of his day, he noted that this form of symbolic rivalry can be observed in all societies. He went on to argue that all societies comfortably produce the wealth necessary to satisfy their needs in terms of food, housing, education of children, socializing, etc. However, they generally produce a quantity of wealth far greater than that needed to satisfy these needs, in order to allow their members to distinguish themselves from one another.